Hey, what's up? This is Tony making food Matta. A little Tony talk, a modified view on the culinary industry. Just like the last couple of podcasts, I'm doing a simulcast with a YouTube video and my podcast. So you can check out my YouTube channel. It's www.youtube.com/C/modified cooking. That's for the podcast people. So today we are going to jump right into it, and we're going to talk a little bit about recipe reading. Okay, so recipe reading. Why is that important? Recipe reading and prepping, actually, being a prep cook. So recipe reading. It's very important to know how to read a recipe. A couple of things that you want to do when you read a recipe is look at the whole recipe. You need to look at the whole recipe to see what you need, your ingredients, the equipment, the time, how long it takes to make it. Are there certain steps? All these things are very, very important within recipe reading. First off, basic, you need to know if it's by weight, if it's by value, if it's metric, if it's US. There's all sorts of measurements, all sorts of recipes out there that you have and you get and you look at them. A pound of this to a pound of that. You need to figure these things out. How many teaspoons in a tablespoon? If you are going to times that by 2, your math has to be on. It has to be on. So you know that 3 teaspoons are in a tablespoon, right? Okay, so then you need 2 times that recipe, so then you use 6, so you need 2 tablespoons. You'll be all right. You'll figure it out. Knowing how many ounces in a gallon, 128 ounces in a gallon. How many ounces are in a pound? 16 ounces in a pound. 4 ounces in a quarter pound. 32 ounces, 64 ounces in a half gallon. And you know the difference between a pint, between a quart. I might say, hey, go grab a pound of butter. Standard pound of butter is one of those big blocks of butter. That's 1 pound of butter. If you're going to make a roux, you use 1 pound of butter by weight to 1 pound of butter or 1 pound of flour. That's typically how I make my roux. So you need to know these simple mathematic equations. It didn't come to me overnight. I had to work on it. There was a cheat sheet that we had at Albert's, and it was up there, and I looked at it. Sometimes I still get a little confused, and I'll check out my phone. Hey, Google, whatever, and I'll figure it out. So that's something a little bit about like measurements and sizes and weights and stuff like that. You have to know that, especially in baking. You have to be precise. If you use too much baking soda, it's gonna mess up your dough. So you really, really need to know these mathematical equations, or you need to be spot on. Just study it. It comes by with time. Being a good prep cook, recipe reading, those things go hand in hand. Okay? So we look at the whole recipe. We have it. It says to do this, this, and this. You follow it. Roast off the tomatoes. Let them cool. Then throw them in the RoboCoo. Or then throw them in the blender. Do not do what one of my friends did at this restaurant. He put a bunch of hot stuff into a Vitamix, turned it on high, and it exploded all over his face. So don't put hot stuff in a Vitamix. That was an interesting story. Anyways, so you have to follow these rules, follow the recipe rules. If it says mince, then mince. If it says chop, then chop. So these are things about recipe reading. Look at the whole recipe. Read it from front to back. And if your chef says, "Mise this out for me," because you've never made that, you mise it out every single ingredient, and you separate them all, so the chef can come by and look at them all to make sure that your measurements are proper. We don't want to do this stuff twice. Just do it right the first time, and if you don't know, don't be too prideful just to ask. Hey, I ask all the time. If I don't know something, like I said, I'm not the best chef in the world, but I know how a kitchen runs. So read the recipe all the way through, follow the rules. Follow the rules. That was another podcast. Mise en place. That was another podcast. See how all these go together? Chef life. Make sure you have everything. Make sure you have that equipment. If it calls for that Roboku or that China cap or that chinois, or a stick blender, Vitamixer, whatever you need, make sure that you have that, because there's nothing worse than trying to make a recipe and then spending half the time running around the kitchen looking for something. Or maybe that recipe that you're making, you only have a certain amount of time, or there's these certain time frames that you have to complete this recipe in. If you're not set up for success, if you don't have all your equipment, then you're gonna fail. Mise en place. Just saying. Make sure you use the proper equipment. Make sure you use the equipment properly. If you're mixing dough, make sure that you mix it on low, or you mix it on high, or that you let it rest, or let it sit, let it proof. Whatever you have to do whenever you're reading that recipe, you follow the rules of the recipe. Whoever wrote that recipe probably failed a couple times and then was like, let me try it this other way, and now it works. Trial and error. And that's the beautiful thing about the kitchen, because if it fails the first time, if you fail the first time, then you would know what not to do the next time. That's why I love being a cook and growing up, moving the way up through the ranks. Oh man, I used too much baking powder. Oh no. Or my pan was too hot. Or I folded this wrap the wrong way. Let me try it with this way. Let me try it that way. Let me actually listen to the chef, because he's the chef and maybe he knows what he's doing. Another thing about recipe reading, prep cooking, things of that nature, is you want to make sure you have enough time. Make sure you have enough time to complete that recipe within your shift. You have to have enough time to finish that. That's part of follow through. Okay, so being a prep cook, you come in, you check with the chef, see what's going on. What do I need? Do I need this? I'm gonna make a list. You better believe that you're gonna have a bunch of these little pads right here that have all your recipes on them, and you have a little pad in your back pocket and a little Sharpie, and you write things down, and then all of a sudden you have a bunch of little pads with all sorts of recipes on them that you can refer to later because you're taking notes and you're a good prep cook. So that was a little tangent about prepping and little notebooks, but it's very important that if you have a notebook and a Sharpie and some tape, that is your best friend being a prep cook. Making sure that you have enough time is very important to complete a recipe. If you're going to make a stock and it has to go overnight, then yes, that's fine. that is fine that you let that go overnight, but you better believe that you should tell the chef in the morning that you have stock going on. Make sure that it's low, make sure that it's not burning, and make sure that the hood vents are on. Okay? The hood vents aren't on and you got that 80-gallon stock steam jacket kettle going overnight and your hood vents are not on, there could be an issue when the chef comes in the morning. Make sure your hood vents are on. So you communicate with the person the next day about that stock, that item. Okay, that's something, stock takes a long time. Now, let's say you had to braise something. Okay, order of operations, my friends. Order of operations. What is going to take the longest and what is going to take the shortest? Obviously, if you have some braised ribs or something braised that need to go in the morning, you need to get it in the morning. Maybe you cut up your mirepoix, onion, celery, carrots. You cut up your mirepoix. Then you season your short ribs or season your meat or whatever you're braising. You sear it, whatever. You sear it, you put it on the bed of mirepoix, maybe put a little bit of demi in there, chicken stock, beef stock, whatever you want, fish sauce, I don't know. You might be doing some sort of fusion stuff. But you put that together, you put the aluminum foil on it or the parchment paper or however you prepare it or whatever, and you put it in the oven right away. First thing that you do when you get in. You don't want to be doing that an hour before your shift ends and leaving it for the next guy, because chances are that next guy is going to burn it or he's going to forget about it, and that's you just not being planning out your day properly and just not being a good cook. Being careless, actually. Just don't do it. You know, make sure you have enough time. You want to be prideful of your things that you make. You know, you want to make sure that everything is done, that it tastes good. That's kind of about the follow through in one of the other segments that I did. You have to make sure that you have that follow through, because if not, then what's the point? What's the point? Make sure that you have enough time to complete that recipe. Make sure that when you make your prep lists in the beginning of the shift, you do order of operations, whatever is going to take the longest, you know, you do that first, right? However, if you can do some of that, but then let's say that you need some steak bites cut up real fast for service. Service starts in an hour. The last prep cook kind of messed up, and you have to pick up the slack. However, being chef, being cook, you have to make sure that the job gets done. You cannot just be like, oh, well, I don't know, it's not here. Not my job. It's nothing more embarrassing than saying that you're out of something during the middle of lunch service because you forgot to do it, or tell the chef, or you blame it on somebody else because you're a punk. Own up, man up, and just take responsibility and just do it. Get it done. I hate when people say it's not my job, or well, it was like that and I didn't see it, and no. Just get it done. Own up, be a man or woman, whatever. So make sure you have enough time. Essentially, make sure that you are reading the recipe all the way through. Being a good prep cook is not really that hard, but if you're a good prep cook, then you will be a good line cook. You will understand everything. You will understand the ins and outs. Usually prep cooks work a lot closer. Well, in my experience, a lot of my prep cooks have worked a lot closer with me, and we work together as a team we had that bond, just like the other one, talking about bonds, prep, cook, cook, bond. You had that bond, and you work together, and the prep cooks actually learn a little bit more. Sometimes I feel that actually the prep cook should make a little bit more than the line cook. That's my opinion, and that's a modified view. So if you are a prep cook, then you're good at these recipe readings. You're good at reading the recipe, making sure that everything is good. Another thing that people always forget about when they read the recipes is how to, or the pans that they need, like the end product. If it goes in a 4-inch hotel pan, if it goes in portion cups or whatever, or if it goes in to a 6-inch hotel pan, or if it's like a mousse and you have to pipe it into something, or you don't have your piping bag ready, or whatever, like that end product. Sometimes people reading the recipe, they forget about that. Sometimes, like, I'll say, hey, divide this, the very last step, divide this into quart containers. I like using quart containers. Divide this into quart containers, put in an ice bath or put in a blast chiller, and that's the end of the recipe. And then the next day you come in, that thing's in a 5-gallon bucket, 5-gallon Lexan. Well, I was very precise when I wrote the recipe to say put it in deli cups. That recipe makes 8 deli cups. I need 1 deli cup per recipe, and that's what it is. Usually when I write recipes, I like to have things, 1 bag of this, 1 deli cup of this, that, and the other, so I don't have half bags and half deli cups of random stuff all over my kitchen. Be efficient. That's what I like. I like being efficient. So when I write that recipe and it says split into deli cups, split it into deli cups, because that's the recipe. I wrote it. So, I mean, it's what it is. Like I said, I go into these little tangents sometime. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say about recipe reading. Going into everything about it, being a prep cook, just things like that. Just read the recipe, read it all the way through, do the math, convert it, make sure that you got teaspoons and not tablespoons, or tablespoons instead of teaspoons, ounces versus weight. You want to make sure that you have the weight. You want to make sure that you have the volume. Weight and volume is a lot different. Just saying, you need to look at these things, because there's nothing more than when you're trying to make a recipe and you mess it up and then you have to do it over again. Because the chef, if he's a good chef, will say, you know what, make that over again. Sorry, you peeled 50 pounds of potatoes, but you messed up those mashed potatoes. You gotta peel some more mashed potatoes. Read the recipe right, and you'll be alright. So, once again, I am Tony Making Food Mata. This is a little Tony Talk on a multicast, YouTube, my podcast. Check out my YouTube channel, Modified Cooking Podcast, Tony Talk, a modified view. In this case, it was a modified view on reading recipes. Thank you, and have a good night.